I wanted to start with the monopoly Nvidia has been holding, because we've discussed for a long time them losing that chokehold for years, but we've yet to really see that play out. So you do say that custom inference silicon could break that dominance. Tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah, so I think this is an interesting scenario in which, and I'll give a kitchen analogy if that helps. So think of NVIDIA as like a Swiss Army knife, right? So their chips are really good for a lot of things, but when you want to get hyper specific, which is where, these inference models are helpful, you want the knife that can cut 1,000 onions in a row. You don't want a knife that gets dull on onion 5. So where these AI firms are going to start to really pick up is building their own custom AI specific chips. NVIDIA is a generalist business by nature, and they've done super well in that because, the average person could use it for gaming, could use it for AI model training. But as these companies want to save more money and not have that, monopoly that NVIDIA holds, they're going to want to start training these models in real time, which is why these hyper-specific cases where the inference comes in will be more beneficial for these individual businesses.
Noah, is this the most important shift happening within kind of AI and innovation there? And are investors onto this, or is this still kind of happening in the background?
Yeah, so I think they're actually in private markets. I spoke to some VC firms recently, and they're starting to invest in a lot of these inference businesses. So I would say on a public notion, it's probably not quite as popular, but in the private markets and in the big player markets, I'd say it's quite popular. In terms of the most important shift, I think the most important shift we'll see in general is independence, right? AI allows companies from small to large to be less reliant on other players for them to build products. So I would say this is another prime example of where if I'm a small business owner and I understand how to train my models in real time, I'll save a lot of money without having to license, technology that could be very expensive to me. So I'd say that the AI revolution is a continuance of the independence and the separation for businesses, honestly, from each other.
Okay, you mentioned, of course, inference being such a huge part of AI compute, but who do you see as more the specific, say, winners and losers under that framework?
Yeah, so I would say it's tough to determine like an exact winner or loser. I'd say people that are really, really good at specific things. So companies that like Micron that are really good with their memory chips, and businesses that have a lot of data. I think data-driven businesses, like you look at Meta, for example, you look at Tesla, companies that have all this internal data that you can use to train their models, I think are going to be the long-term winners because they don't need to buy that data, right? Foundation models like OpenAI and Anthropic, these private businesses, they rely on certain companies to help train their models. If a public company like Tesla, will say, has the data for them to train their robotaxis and their autonomous cars, they're going to save a lot of time, money, and energy on building these internal AI tools.
No, is it still big tech at the center of growth here when it comes to AI? Or as you mentioned, some of the private marketplaces are fishing in some other ponds. Are there starting to be, as you say, more independence, or is it becoming more decentralized?
Yeah, I would say that deglobalization has been happening not only at the geopolitical level, but at the technological level. You see that certain data centers, maybe in different parts of the world, that are funding the technological growth. But yeah, I would say that companies are becoming more independent. The average person is able to do a lot more for themselves, for their business, and for their life than they were 20 years ago, which I think is great. I think independence creates even more innovation. And as companies like big tech, which may weight, the average returns of the S&P more, they're going to be forced to compete even harder with these individuals. So I think, interestingly enough, the independence will actually prop up the economy because everybody's going to realize, wait, there's a person across the street that could do the same thing I'm doing. So I need to find an even more innovative way to create capital opportunities than before.
Some breaking news crossing the terminal. Google will invest $10 billion in Anthropic, according to the startup, with another $30 billion potentially to follow. Anthropic said Google's committing to invest $10 billion now in cash at a $350 billion valuation, the same value it was at in a funding round in February, but not including the money raised. Bloomberg's AI reporter Shireen Ghaffari has the story and is with us now. Not straightforward, but potentially big numbers. What do we need to know? How is this structured?
That's right. So this is part of a bigger trend we're seeing where the big tech companies are investing some, eye-popping numbers into the main AI labs. And Anthropic being one that especially is in a moment when it needs more compute as it's seeing its demand soar for products like Claude Code.
So up to $40 billion. We're just showing shares of Alphabet, parent of Google. They shot up when the headline hit. That's not a surprise. How do we get up to $40 billion? How's it structured?
So there are certain milestones in place. They have not disclosed what. That is similar to what we've seen with some past deals between Nvidia and OpenAI. And, it's always a potential in the future, right, when we're talking about beyond that initial $10 billion. However, that $10 billion alone is not to be discounted. Again, these are sort of unprecedented amounts that we're seeing these labs raise on the strength of the demand that they're seeing. However, at the same time, seeing high cost and high need for compute.
I find Anthropic to be, and its strategy to be so interesting. So if OpenAI's strategy was to spend a lot on its own infrastructure, to me, Anthropic seems to think, okay, I need to do deals that get me capacity, but in a way that they don't need to spend that much money. Is that the right read on how they go about it?
I think that Anthropic has not been as flashy in the past in some of its announcements. We saw Stargate and, OpenAI announce it in the Oval Office with President Trump. We've also seen, OpenAI maybe talk about some of these projects a little earlier than Anthropic. That being said, Anthropic's also, its products have really fully taken off a little later than OpenAI too. So they may be at different moments in their kind of curve of trying to get this compute. But as I've reported in the past, OpenAI has said that, they've been early to this and that they feel confident that they have secured this compute well in advance of this current moment.
Okay, to recap, Google plans to invest up to $40 billion into Anthropic. It starts with $10 billion in cash now at a $350 billion valuation.
And we're speaking to many, many leaders, and so many of them had this common theme of, don't panic. That's what a good leader does. You stay calm in the face of what appears to be, to your words, chaos or uncertainty. So if you stay calm, you don't panic and use this as an opportunity if there's any further volatility, what would you be doing?
Well, so, and that is exactly kind of what I would suggest or what I would tell our clients as a wealth manager to stay calm through this. You've got a well-diversified portfolio, right? So you should be able to ride out. In fact, we'll take advantage and look to buy names. And so some of those names that we bought were names in the tech space that had gotten way overdone. I'll say Microsoft was the perfect example. That had traded down 36% off its high, right down to a long-term trend line at 350 where it bounced, and then we saw it, rally up. Now that we've seen a big bounce in some of the tech names, we're not chasing it. But there are other names. Financials, I think, provide an opportunity. I think you still have to look at consumer staples because I still think there's going to be ongoing volatility, not only because of what's happening in the Mideast, but also it's a midterm election year here in this country. And there's a lot of kind of simmering there's a lot simmering on the back burner because of that as we look to see who the candidates are, how far left they are, how far right they are, is also going to cause some anxiety. So look at industrials, look at basic materials, financials for sure. Tech, I would be very strategic in tech. I wouldn't be necessarily chasing the names that we've seen recover very quickly, but there are other opportunities. In my mind, look at IBM. That sold off hard today on the back of what I thought was a very good earnings report, but with some cautious guidance, and that I think it provides an opportunity. So I think you have to be strategic, but you have to be very disciplined.
Yeah, and it's pretty remarkable that earnings growth is a sort of a back in the market narrative, Kenny, when we've got this war going on. And it's not just, Russia's war in Ukraine or what's happening in Gaza. It's really about the global choke point. And you point this out, that the oil market is doing something, hearing something else. The bond market is doing something else. And then the stock market is trading on this idea that it will just somehow get resolved, or there is a Trump put or some relief at some point in time because it's the election year. Why are they hearing different things and focusing on different things? Is that a market complacency or dysfunction? I mean, I know that the stock market tends to sort of look forward, but this is looking forward into a lot of inflationary shocks and so on.
Well, I certainly don't think it's complacency at all. I think the bond market and some of the commodities markets are kind of trading. They're seeing right now, they're trading around this nervousness. Remember, the stock market always looks 4 to 6 months out, right? It's like a forward-looking mechanism. And so what I think was happening when we saw the market surge over the last 12, 13 days, was that it was trying to look through it. It thought that we had the end to this. You know, the U.S. now is blockading all of Iran. They thought, or it's thinking, that pretty soon Iran is going to economically start choking. They're losing $430 million every day that they're blockaded. So how long can they really last with that blockaded? So I think initially we saw that rally come on the back of the idea, okay, this is going to be over. But look what's happening. It's not really over yet. Iran is still pushing back. They're still threatening. They're still launching drones. And so now you see this nervousness. So I think the commodity markets and the bond markets had it right. I think stock investors were a little bit too optimistic. But remember, as a long-term investor, you are looking out, right? You're not trading today, so you're hoping to see what happens. Now, that being said, inflation remains sticky. But if they get this solved, oil will kind of retreat quickly. That doesn't mean that they're going to get it all open, which I think stock investors have to start to recognize that it's going to take time to bring everything back to normal. It's not going to be days, it might be weeks and even months. And that's what they're going to have to start pricing in. And we're going to hear more about that when we start talking about the next CPI and the next PPI.
Drew, it's good to have you here. And we're ending the week on a pretty positive note.
Yeah, look, I think we're looking through a lot of the conflict, a lot of the messiness in Washington around the Fed and rates, and we're starting to think about fundamentals again. Now, look, we expect earnings to be good. We think this year is going to be a strong earnings year in general, really supported by the secular trends in the economy. There's a little bit of weakness and concern on the cyclical side, but again, markets are starting to look out the other side.
Can we talk about Nvidia? And I have a note here that says you like Nvidia, you like Micron. I mean, there's a bunch of different things in here, from Teradyne to Rockwell to Eaton to CrowdStrike, Palantir, Lilly, and Boston Scientific. But Nvidia popping 5% today tells you what?
The semiconductor story is real. It's real in memory. It's real in more advanced chips. The AI build out, honestly, the choke point, the supply choke point is chips. And we think markets are going to keep rotating to those supply constrained areas. Semis is a really easy place to go. Margins are expanding. Sales are growing faster than assets. And that's true of a lot of the AI infrastructure build out as well.
Can we still think about semis in the traditional way as a leading indicator for the broader markets in the economy?
That's not how we're thinking about it. It's not a cyclical story to us. It's a growth story. I think you have to disentangle those two narratives. And again, it's about build out. It's about AI that we think has legs.
But why wouldn't that mean positives for the rest of the market and the rest of the economy?
So it's because their buyers aren't really rate and cyclical sensitive. So their buyers are the hyperscalers that have a bunch of cash, that have really clean balance sheets, that can really eat those cost pass-throughs. But when you look more broader in the cyclical economy, I don't think consumer companies can push along price and inflation the same way the industrials and the semiconductors can to their buyers. So it's about who is buying from them that makes them less cyclical right now.
I just wonder if all the investment dollars flowing through the AI economy ultimately will make their way through the jobs market, which makes its way into consumer pocketbooks and wages and spending. I mean, if the money is not being hoarded, isn't it going to be spent and benefit the rest of the economy?
Well, it's showing up in earnings to start. So the transition mechanism isn't one for one. Yeah, it will show up in wage inflation in different types of jobs. That's for sure. We've seen that for a while. People have talked about supply constraints in more blue collar and physical work. We get that, but that's going to accrue to companies first before it starts feeding through. To us, you're looking at, wealth effect supports consumers. We get that. But more broadly, it's not really the cleanest labor market read if you talk to our economists.
Understood. I want to ask you about a weaker spot of the market right now. You do like Palantir, but I was actually going to put it in the defense context, where those defense names are down like 9 sessions in a row. And yes, they have a lot of pressure from the government to ramp up their output, and that's never a great spot to be in. But what's the impact, do you think, for kind of equity holders? And is there anything larger to take away from that other than just be careful of being in that sector right now?
Cap goods priced in a lot of expected growth, and the defense names fall in there. And look, they can't really push price because their supplier or sorry, not their supplier, their buyer actually has a lot of power in this instance. So if their input costs go up, again, they're not passing them through. So when we think about the industrials opportunity, we're looking for companies that can pass through cost and really hold up margins. And again, I've said this, grow sales faster than assets. I want profit expansion. I want efficiency. I'm not sure we really get that in the defense story, even though the headlines would make you think people should rush to that space.
So you've called it 2026 the ROI reckoning, with most AI projects failing to deliver that value. So what specific signals should investors be watching to, say, separate real AI adoption from abandoned pilots?
Yeah, so there's a statistic, I don't remember the exact number, that most AI agents fail. And I think the two main reasons for this is that, one, they are either too broad. So, you look at some of these LLMs that have a lot of hallucination problems. So if a company, let's take a financial advisory firm, needs a robo-advisor, right? You need a lot of data to train these models. So I'd say the AI that does really well has the best access to clean, processed, and filtered data. You can have AI engineers that are very good, and those are obviously hard to come by. But I think the people that can really streamline the process from training a model, using inference, and then having it in a real world application are going to do very well. And that means companies that are willing to be a little more patient than average, right? You have startups that can produce, I think they call it shipping, a lot of products, right? But just because I can make 20 products doesn't mean the 20 products are going to be good. So I think companies that are willing to get the data really clean it, have it really settled and understanding of where they want to go, and then release those products after they've been tested are going to be the clear winners.
Noah, as you know, as an asset manager, it's important to find the winners, but it's also important to avoid the big drawdowns. What are the big risks that you kind of see maybe clouding the AI trade over the next couple of years that maybe aren't talked about enough?
Yeah, so I think one of the clouding factors is in the private credit markets, where you see that there's a lot of headlines about this, right? I think the ones that people forget is not necessarily the dollar amount that's being lent, but who is the money being lent to. Private credit managers that are going to do well have made the lending and the floating rate debt and these things to the right players. And so I think when it comes to, like headlines, news, obviously you have to pay attention to, but I think the biggest things to partake in are the people that have experience, right? You have technological people that can understand, the tech side and the AI side, but do they have managers and CEOs that have just been through hard times? The people that are going to win are the people that have understood the great financial crisis, the people that have understood the COVID crisis, right? The world is tricky, and so if you can bounce back on your feet and learn from your mistakes, right? We need people that are dynamic CEOs, people that are understanding that they're gonna mess up. They have to own that mistake, but then are willing to figure out what did they do wrong. If they can understand the mistakes they made and train themselves like an AI model, then they're gonna be okay.